Number 2, as mentioned in Bible class, this evening will be the last chance to obtain and fill out an input sheet. Wait, Mike already did that, so just a healthy reminder for everybody. Make sure that you get that. The elders want your input as well. If you have your Bible with you, please turn to Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8. And it says there, when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. That's Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. Most of you know that I am a big sports fanatic. My wife likes football, that's it. And so often throughout generations, they always have these lists. I can remember in 2000 as a teenager, ESPN did the top 100 athletes of the century. And in order to get on that list, you had to be pretty amazing. I can remember hearing a story of Jim Thorpe, how Jim Thorpe was this huge sports figure and played a ton of sports and was good at a lot of them. And one time he was running a race. I don't know whether it was, I think it might have been in college. And as he got to the meet in the locker room, somebody stole his shoe. And so he ended up running the race with 2 different size shoes on and still won the 100-meter. I can remember the highlight that sticks out of my mind about Michael Jordan is when he's playing the Lakers in the NBA Finals, and he comes down the lane and he switches hands, and I hear Marv Albert go, an amazing move, a spectacular move by Michael Jordan. And then along came this golfer named Tiger Woods, but before that, it was Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer. And the reason that we gravitate to those sports heroes of ours is because they do things that we can't do. They do things that we wish we could have done even when we were at our prime. Even figures of history, we gravitate to figures of history. Why is it that Napoleon is so famous and so many other leaders aren't? Because Napoleon did things that were, by historical standards, amazing. And so we gravitate to this word, amazing. What is it about this word amazing, that draws us to it? Because we know that in order for something to be amazing, it cannot simply be mediocre. It is also tied to this word, great. And so how does that link in? How does that word link in to our faith? I hope this morning that you want to have, or that you possess, an amazing faith. And so what we're going to see in Matthew chapter 8, if we struggle, we meet people all the time. And if we're honest, sometimes we're a little bit annoyed by these people. About those people, ever meet those people that no matter what's going on, they just say, God's got it. Well, hey, you've got this serious illness that's heading down your way. What do you think you're going to be able to do about that? Well, I'm just going to pray about it and leave it up to the Lord. Hey, you've got this circumstance or situation that you're dealing with at work. How are you going to handle that? Well, I'm just going to pray for him. What? You're going to pray for that person? Don't you understand that person is out to get you? You know what? The only person that can change the only thing that can change that person's heart is an example of the Lord to that person. And sometimes it drives us crazy, right? It drives us crazy when we come in contact with these people, mostly because we know that that's not our answer. And 2, we might know that that's not our faith. That's not the way that our faith operates. To just simply give up everything. Give up control. This word surrender is not necessarily in our modern day American vocabulary. And so this morning, I hope that as we move through Matthew chapter 8, that we're going to see something that's only seen once in the entire New Testament. Something that's seen once in the entire Bible. And that is an instance where Jesus himself is amazed. And it takes place right here in Matthew chapter 8. So let's set the context of Matthew chapter 8. From Matthew chapter 5 to Matthew chapter 8 verse 1 is the famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus engages a large crowd of people, and he uses this phrase, "You have heard it has been said," or "You have heard that it's been taught, but now I say to you." And what Jesus is doing is he is systematically tearing down an old way, an old teaching that is full of tradition. Not full of God's law, but full of tradition. And so what he's doing here in Matthew chapter 8, he's now moved from teaching about those traditions. He's now moved from teaching about the old law and starting the process of establishing his law, to now he's going to take the opportunity to show it. So he comes down off of this mountain, and wouldn't you know, as he comes down off of this mountain, behold, it says there, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, if you will, you can make me clean." And so this leper isn't doubting Jesus' ability to make him clean. The leper is asking, are you willing? Do you have an eagerness? Do you have a desire for the action to take place? Now picture yourself in this setting. You're a Jewish group that's just heard all of these teachings from Matthew chapter 5 to Matthew chapter 8 verse 1, and now a leper is in your midst. A leper is in the midst of this teacher who has amazed you with this teaching. And here comes somebody that from your mindset, in your culture, is ceremoniously unclean. This person who has a skin disease, that in your line of thought, in your method of teaching, in what God has passed down to you through the Old Testament, this person was required to be separated from the group outside of the city until they were well. And if they were anywhere near your population, they had to put their hand over their mouth, their hand in the air, and say, "Unclean, unclean, unclean," so people would know, so people would get a heads up that, hey, this sick person, this unclean person is coming your way, and you're not to have anything to do with that person. And so what's Jesus going to do? How is he going to approach this sick person who, in the mind of all of the people around them, must have done something wrong because he has leprosy? And what is Jesus' reaction? Jesus not only follows the teaching that he is, not only lays out the teaching, not only talks about what it looks like, about this new law, this new authority that he has. He not only talks about it, he shows it and he expresses it, because notice what it says. "Lord, if you will, you can make me clean." And in verse 3 it says, "And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean." Notice the faith of the leper. The leper understood that what he was asking and where he was and the position that he was in was not the norm. It was not, shall we say, pun intended, kosher to do what he was doing. What leper would ever approach a Jewish teacher and say, "Hey, clean me, fix me, help me. Take what you have and give it to me so that I might be clean"? And notice the response of Jesus. Jesus unlike every other teacher of his time, steps and moves towards the leper rather than moving away from the leper. Where so many would separate themselves from the leper, it is Jesus who moves immediately to the leper because he knows that he can heal the leper. And he stretches out and he touches him. And it says in the text, and sometime later that month, his leprosy was gone. Is that what the text says? No, that's not what the text says. The text says, immediately his leprosy was cleansed. He was clean. Why? Because the leper took the opportunity, took the step of faith in the direction of Jesus, knowing and trusting that Jesus had the goods to deliver what he needed for his life. The leper had an amazing faith because the leper's faith was unlike what he was accustomed to, what he was used to, and probably most important, it got people in that area out of their comfort zone. And he had this amazing faith. And so then Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go and show yourself before the priests and offer gifts that Moses commanded for proof to them. Hey, you're clean. Do what the Lord has instructed you to do. Go and show proof to those who are over you that you are okay. And then in this second piece of amazing faith, it says that when he entered Capernaum, and this is Jesus's, what we would call it, ministry HQ. This is where he operated all of the time. This is where, where Jesus's ministry took place for the most part. And he says there that a centurion came forward to him. Hold up, time out. What's going on here? You just had a leper come to you, and now you have this centurion. And this centurion was the commanding officer that fought alongside his men. He was in charge of about 100 Roman soldiers. And if you know anything about Jewish Roman relations during the first century, it wasn't kumbaya. It wasn't peaceful. Because the Romans were seen as the bad guys. The Romans were seen as the invaders. The Romans were seen as these, pagan Gentiles that had no use for Yahweh and did not want anything to do with the one true God of Israel. And so here we have this moment of tension, much like the one where we see Jesus and the leper, where we have this instance of this Jewish leader that taught amazingly, and you have this Roman centurion, and the question might have been, what did we do to get in trouble? Because Roman centurions just don't walk up to Jews and say, hey, how's your day going? Hey, want to go get a bite to eat down at the cafe? It's, oh no, we're probably either going to die or go to jail. And notice what the centurion says. The centurion says, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. What an amazing statement by Jesus. Couldn't you just see amidst this large crowd or this crowd of people, the looks on their faces when Jesus says that? What do you mean you're going to go heal the centurion's servant? Actually, it'd probably better if he died and whatever he had, he transferred it to you, and then you transferred it to all your 100 men, and they transferred it to the whole Praetorian Guard so that the Romans would just get out of this place. But what does Jesus do? Jesus doesn't say that. Jesus doesn't say, good riddance, have a nice day. Don't collect $200 when you pass go. Jesus says, hey, I'll come and I'll heal him. And notice the response of the centurion. Watch this type of faith. Because most people, when they hear Jesus say, I'll come and heal them, they say, come on, let's go. Notice what he says in verse 8. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. But only say the word, and my servant will be healed. Wow. Jesus makes the step and says, I will come into your house. It's not the first time that Jesus has entered the house of tax collectors and sinners. He says, I'll come to your place and I will heal your servant. And the Roman centurion, the commanding officer of 100 people of the world's finest fighting force at that time, swallows his own pride and says, I'm not worthy for you to come to my house. And there's no indication in the text that the centurion had ever met Jesus before. There's no indication in the text that the centurion had ever been to the temple. There's no indication in the text that the centurion had ever been into the synagogue. So how did he know that this Jesus fellow who is walking in Galilee, that was in Capernaum, how did he know? How could he trust? How could he have that kind of faith? Not because he had seen it with his own eyes, but because he heard about it. And he knew that what he had heard was something completely and totally different than anything else he had ever seen, or anything else that he had ever heard in his life. And the question we have to ask ourselves is that our type of faith? That although we don't see, we still trust in the capabilities and the powers of God to show up in our life. And notice what he says in verse 9. He says, I too am a man under authority. So he has this idea of what authority looks like. He says, hey, I'm a man under authority with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And my servants do this. My servant do this, and he does it. He goes, hey, I get what it means to be in charge. I mean, I've got a bunch of people under me, and I say, hey, go grab a burger from the cafe down on Main Street, and they'll go and get it. I see a guard standing at his post, and I'm 100 yards away, and I say, hey, you, come here. And guess what happens? He runs to me because he is under me. The people that are under me, they come to me not because I'm some great person, right? They come to me because I am in a position of authority and I represent Rome. But you, Jesus, you're a guy of authority. And here's the thing. I command these people and they come. But what I see in you, Jesus, is someone who doesn't command necessarily just people. You command sickness and death. You have authority over those things. As I represent Rome, you represent somebody that is unimaginably powerful. You represent somebody who is unimaginably merciful. And so in the light of the fact that we're both people of authority, I'm willing, although I've never been to synagogue, I've never been to the temple, we've never met one-on-one, I am willing to put myself underneath you. Because I see that you're greater. I see, even though I haven't seen. And notice the response of Jesus. And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed. He marveled and said, "Truly, I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such a faith." See, Jesus crossed a line in both of these situations that needed to be crossed on the basis of the faith of the other person. He grew up and was surrounded by a people who used lines to keep people out, whereas Jesus said, "I'm going to cross that line so that I might bring people in." Because of their faith, because they want to know God, I'm willing to step in their direction. And notice what happens when Jesus steps in the direction of the centurion. He's amazed by the centurion's faith in comparison to who? He says it right here. I tell you, with no one in Israel have found such faith. He goes, hey, the people that I'm trying to actually preach to, your faith is greater than theirs. Because the Pharisees and the Sadducees claim to see, yet they are blind. They don't take into account what's right in front of them. Yet this centurion has never met Jesus. And he says, I'm all in. I'm there. The leper comes to Jesus and says, I know you can make me clean if you want to. And notice the contrast that Jesus then makes between the centurion and the Israelites and the Jews. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. And it says this isn't just a Jew thing. This is a as far as the east is to the west thing, that there will be people who are not like the Jews that come and they actually recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yet the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness, in a place where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, why is that? Why would Jesus make that statement? Because as we see in the New Testament, the difference between the centurion and the difference between the centurion and leper and the Israelites and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the lawyers is that the scribes, lawyers, and Pharisees and Sadducees built their faith on who they were and what they wanted. As we talked about last Wednesday, there's a point in which the teaching of the elders was that if your wife burns the toast, you can divorce her. And the question that should have been asked is, where's that in the law? Where's that one in the Torah? Don't pick grain. Okay, where's that in the law? Where's that in the Torah? Who was the Sabbath actually made for? And so what we see is that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the rulers of the Jewish population made everything about proximity to the temple and proximity to their own traditions in which they held as laws, but really weren't laws. And the faith that amazes Jesus is the one that is a genuine faith that comes without preconceived notions and simply trusts even when the fulfillment isn't completely and totally seen. I hope that all of us here believe and have faith that God has promised those who are faithful to him heaven, even though none of us have ever with our own eyes actually seen it. And so the question that we have to ask this morning is, where is our faith? What is our faith built on? Is our faith built on the complete and total unwavering trust in Jesus Christ, no matter what circumstance or situation we find ourselves in? And we see that is a major piece of the puzzle when it comes to having an intimate relationship with God. The centurion did not care what the consequences were going to be when all of his boys found out that he had a conversation with Jesus. At that point, who knows what Caesar would have done? Who knows what the officer over him would have done? But he says, you know what? This Jesus guy is so important that I'm willing to risk my life, my neck, and my job so that he might show up in my life. The leper, how long had the leper gone in his life? And everybody pointed to him and said, ha ha, leper. Ha ha, unclean. And he says, there's the person that I know that can make me clean, and it doesn't matter what people say about who I used to be. Who I am now supersedes what I used to be. And the question is, are we still dwelling in that mindset? Do we care so much about our jobs and our 401ks that we would miss Jesus? Do we care so much about who we used to be that we don't tell people about who we are and what we're about? Are we so constrained by the lines and the boxes that we've made from our own traditions or from our perceptions about people, like lepers, that we would move away from them quicker than we would run towards them with the gospel? When was the last time we stepped outside of our lines culturally to engage the population around us? Most of you know that I've been talking with a lady who's a pagan at Starbucks. And you know what I found out about this pagan? This pagan has a name. Her name is Cameron. And this pagan, whose name is Cameron, is also a bisexual. This pagan, whose name is Cameron, who's also a bisexual, believes in reincarnation, does not ultimately believe in a heaven or a hell. But you know what's interesting about Cameron? Cameron's a pretty cool person. Actually, outside of those things that would distinguish her from the rest of society, she's pretty normal. She has a father, she has a mother, she has a boyfriend, and she works with a group called Piedmont Pagan Pride. And you know what they do? On September 23rd, they're going to have a food drive. They're going to collect clothes for the homeless. And they're going to sit around and they're going to sing encouraging songs. Let me ask you, you think the community will take notice of that? What if I told you that that group, even in this area, in the 15 years they've been here, they've quadrupled in size? Now, certainly I would not say that Cameron and I share the same religious beliefs. And a matter of fact, I would say there are a lot of things that Cameron would do and would say and would believe that I would disagree with. And so what is the response to that? What is the response of the Christian to that? Are we to separate ourselves from people like Cameron, or are we to engage those people so that they might, while different, know about who Jesus is? Because guess what? That's what is amazing about faith, is that faith shows no discriminatory action when it comes to relaying the gospel to people. Maybe what we need to do in order to have amazing faith is tear down some walls that were never meant to be put up in the first place. And our conversation is going to take place again at 9 o'clock on Thursday at Starbucks. But I would be willing to say that for some, that would be a severe challenge to their faith. That would be a severe challenge to what they believe, what they've grown up with, and what they've been taught. Because the Pharisees were taught to separate rather than engage. And Jesus taught engage rather than separate. And when that person who is so far off, who had so many labels placed on them by the Jewish society, whether that be the leper or the centurion, when they got a chance, when Jesus got a chance to engage, he changed their life. And what's interesting is that the centurion looked more like Jesus than the people that Jesus initially came to save. And what does it mean for the church universal if pagans look more like the church of the first century than the church does? Not what does that say about the pagan? What does that say about the church? Can we actually claim amazing faith if those who don't even believe the resurrection is true look more like the church than the church does? What does that say about me? What does that say about us if that's not our approach to engaging the people around us? Now hear me very clearly. If our faith is only built on being baptized and getting the 5 acts of worship correct, if that's all that our faith encompasses, we've missed the boat. Because here's the thing. I can be baptized and I can get the 5 acts of worship correct every single Sunday, and I can still spiritually be a whitewashed tomb. I can look it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I am it. And I want for all of us to have the kind of faith that the centurion had, that amazes Jesus, that steps out of our comfort zone, that crosses the necessary cultural boundaries that we've set so that people might know God. And here's the last piece to that story. You want to know why Cameron's a pagan? Because when she told people about her struggle in the Southern Baptist Church, they crushed her. They didn't help her work through that situation. They didn't help her work through that circumstance. They came at her with nothing more than condemnation. Instead of helping get her the help she needed, they showed her the Pharisees of the New Testament. And so this morning, are we willing to drop walls, cross lines, and put our full, total self, regardless of circumstance and situation, into Jesus? Is Jesus more important than our labels, our traditions, our jobs, our families, and our prejudices? Because if he is, then we'll engage rather than separate. If he is, our faith will grow because of the people that we meet and that we contact. And if he is, he will be amazed by our faith. And this morning, if you don't have that, I want you to know that just like this centurion, just like this leper, it doesn't matter what, quote, disease you have. Doesn't matter what sin you deal with. Doesn't matter what circumstance or situation you're in. When you contact Jesus, he makes you clean, he makes you new, and he makes you whole. There are a group of people 2,000 years ago who knew that they had killed the one that they'd been searching for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they asked a simple question, which so many people in this society ask. What do I have to do to be whole? What do I have to do to have joy? What do I have to do to have peace? What do I have to do to have a relationship with God? And Peter, of all people, said, I know what it's like. Go ahead, repent. Be baptized. Receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. And begin that journey with God. And maybe there's some of us here who are Christians, and maybe we're holding on too tight to some walls. Maybe we've been boxed in by some labels that we've held, some prejudices, some discrimination that we still have dwelling within the recesses of our heart. And that hasn't unleashed the faith that would amaze Jesus. I would ask us this morning, I would beg of us this morning to let that go and let God in. And if that's your desire this morning, let's do that as we stand and as we sing.